You go to the very next chapter, Exodus 21, starting about verse 7, and it says, if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant. But you can immediately see, even in the King James, that that's a mistranslation from the word mother, because then it uses the word betrothed in the next line, then it uses the word betrothed again in the next line as in engaged to be married, and then you get a little further down, and it points out that if you get a second and a third, that doesn't mean you can shortchange the first one.
I got you, so you have to treat them all with respect.
That's correct.
Now, when you were in Kentucky, how many wives did you have?
Oh, I only had 2. I was a piker.
Well, now, we've always heard that polygamy is illegal and then they will throw you in jail for that.
No, on the contrary. In the first place, practically every state in the Union has struck down their so-called lewd cohabitation statutes. Except
Georgia, we still have a sodomy law.
Is that a sodomy law or a lewd cohabitation law?
We actually have a sodomy law in Georgia, and it's been on the national news. But anyway, go on.
All right. Well, even Georgia's can be dealt with here directly. In my study of the subject, and I'm more of an observer than a participant.
By the way, we ought to describe you are a legal researcher.
That is correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. In other words, I'm the guy people call in when the attorneys have fouled everything up.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what I came across as I looked further and further into this situation is, in the first place, the practice never was what you would call illegal if somebody knew how to fill out the proper paperwork. For example, in most of the states except Georgia and possibly Virginia and a couple of other holdbacks, anything that is not prohibited by law can be the subject of a contract.
I see.
If you want a contract with 6 women at once to live with you and have kids and clean the house and possibly bring home the bacon, you can do that. Those contracts will stand up in all the federal and state courts. There are numerous case sites that support that. For example, as far back as 1948, there was a fellow came over from India. His name was Dalip Singh Burr, and he had 2 wives that he had married in the Punjab province of India. Well, he died in 1948 without leaving a will, so the judge who gets a hold of this case says, okay, which one of you ladies married him first? And this one girl says, well, I did. And she says, okay, you get everything. And she says to number 2, you get nothing. And number 2 says, oh, wait a minute. And number 2 took it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Los Angeles. And anybody that's got access to a law library can look this up. It's a 1948 California case. And the judges that took it in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals said, now, wait a minute. Under international law, and this has been true since before the time of Magna Carta, if a contract is legal in the area or the country where it is entered into, and the parties of that contract move to another area or another country where such contracts are illegal, under international law, that contract must be accepted as valid in the area into which it has been removed. Right? That's number 1. Okay? In the second place, under the Constitution of the United States, what it says is no state may pass any law impairing the obligation of contract. Now, when they put that in there, that was a sort of a sleeper to protect the banks and the finance companies so that the states of the Union could not pass debtor relief laws so that the farmers couldn't wiggle out from under all these banks policing up their farms on a daily basis. Problem is, when they put the words in there, they didn't say that this is strictly to protect banks and finance companies. They said no state may pass any law impairing the obligation of contract. Now, to my knowledge, nobody has ever challenged that in federal court, but I think it's fairly obvious if the pleadings are put together properly what the eventual outcome will be.
Well, we're going to find out about the ramifications of this in just a moment, and already we have folks on the line. I figured that would be the case. So I would imagine if you want to talk to our guest tonight, you want to get your line right away. In the earlier part of our show, we went hours without one single line. So if indeed you have any inclination that you want to be on tonight's show, you better reserve your line now, or you may not be able to get through. And AM-750 WSB, trying to give you unusual things to think about. This is Paul Gonzales. Our guest is Mike Brown, speaking to us live from Pleasant Hope, Missouri. Mike is a legal researcher and is here telling us that polygamy basically is not illegal. And before we get to the phone calls, and we've got them all over the place, let me ask you this: are you saying that as long as the marriage or whatever is a contractual thing, it's okay, but if you marry a woman and then you marry another one, that's bigamy, right?
Well, that's correct. You can fill out all the contracts you want, and they will be upheld by the courts. But the minute you go to the county courthouse and get two marriage licenses for two different women, they will lock you up, not for your behavior with the women, but for messing up their paperwork.
So if I would want to marry two women, what I do is get a marriage contract with the two women, right? And just forget about the marriage license.
That's correct.
And then if I should pass away, which I probably won't, I'm probably going to live forever, but if I should pass away, then by that contract, both of my wives can share in my estate.
That is also correct.
Now, what if the cops come down and say, "Hey, Paul, you're married to two women here. How would I keep out of jail?"
Well, so you have a minor problem if they still have lewd cohabitation statutes in the state of Georgia. You might want to remove it to federal court first on a petition for declaratory and injunctive relief. It'd be easier just to leave the state and go live someplace else.
And also, you're going to tell us a little later how you can buy a wife.
Oh, certainly.
Because a lot of women, that's really just what they want, right, is just to be secure and whatever, and you're just doing it, not covertly.
That's correct. I realize the words just property are going to get a lot of people's noses open, but a Ferrari is just property. It has value, so you take care of it, and that's something half the men in this country don't do with their women and kids.
Okay, and let's get to the phones here, and our first caller is going to be Scott in Norcross. And Scott, you're on WSB. Good evening. Hello, Scott. All right, Scott must be a nut brain playing with his phone tonight. I get on to my children for doing that, Scott. WH in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. You're on WSB.
How you doing, Paul?
All right, preacher.
Well, I got news for old Mike. He's way behind. You know, in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, all of us southern states down here, we don't go by international law. Strom Thurmond and Jesse Helms wouldn't stand for that at all. We don't even go by the Constitution in the United States, not hardly ever. And I'll tell you something, Paul. I mean, Mike, when you're talking about extra wives, and the Bible saying that, no truth in it. Some cases in the old Bible where men of old, and Christ said that God winked at some of those things, did, and Paul said that too.
Not me.
I mean Paul the Apostle. You know.
Oh,
I
Paul.
know you would. But anyhow, you know what over one woman is, Mike? It's absolutely the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. It embraces all that. And God knows that's the worst sin on this earth to man.
Well, WH, that sounds to me like hell material, doesn't it?
That's bleeding, bloody, fiery hell.
Okay, Mike, what do you think of WH up in Kings Mountain, North Carolina?
Well, not much, because according to him, a fella having extra women is a greater sin than abortions or prostitution or murder and so forth and so on. I just can't go along with him.
But now, let me ask you this, Mike. Why would two women want to marry you when they can go ahead and just get one husband to give her all the attention?
Well, there's a lot of women that feel that way, and the problem that you've got is that there's a man shortage right now, because if you'll look out, sort of like a buyer's market, you go through all these women's magazines, you go to Deer Abbey, and everybody's saying, how come there's so many decent women and so few available men?
Yeah, buyer's market, you're right.
Right, and what happens is, in this society, by the time a woman's 30 years old, here's what her options are. She can live by herself, she can pick up a loser, or the more successful ones simply cause another woman's divorce and move in and get the guy. Now, that really isn't right.
Now, before we get to our next caller, Todd in Loganville, I want to give people a little more fuel to this discussion because there's more than just polygamy. You say that women should not be allowed to vote.
That's correct.
Now, why is that?
Okay, in the first place, the minute we had women's suffrage in this country, we immediately, since there's always more women than men, we immediately turned the whole country over to the women. All right? That's a curse. You'll find it in Isaiah chapter 3, verse 12. In the second place, and we'll bring it home here directly, I realize most people aren't going to be able to relate to this right at the moment, but when the 14th Amendment was passed, it was not, nobody, the framers, never intended it to be used in the fashion that the Supreme Court used it for in 1973. See, up until the time of women's suffrage, a woman's body belonged to either her father or to her husband. Now, all of a sudden, we have people in 1973 saying, okay, well, these women are citizens, therefore, they now have the right, under the 14th Amendment, to do to their own bodies anything they want, which includes having abortions. Now, I realize that this particular argument has been bandied about back and forth. You know, it's right, it's wrong, a woman has the right to privacy, it's murder, so forth and so on. But that's not the issue that's going to cause the major problem. The problem is this. By allowing these women to pull these little stunts, and 1 out of 3 today do it, here's what's happened. We have lost 4,000 potential citizens a day for 17 years. Now, the problem that we've got is that 18 years after this decision was handed down, that all these female citizens were told they could do anything they wanted, no matter how asinine it was, we're going to be missing 2,000 men a day out of the draft pool. So just hide and watch. Sometime next year, they're going to have to reinstitute the draft to keep the military afloat. And if we ever have another war, instead of all those poor kids that fought the Vietnam War that nobody wanted, now the yuppies are going to be coming home in body bags. And then you'll see why I made that statement.
And we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to open the floodgates of the telephone calls. Our guest is Mike Brown, and basically he's saying that women are property, and that a man should be able to buy a wife. He himself has been involved in a polygamous relationship. He says if you do it right, you can do it legally, that women should not be allowed to vote. I wonder what he thinks about a woman's place. It's a woman's place in the home. Would it be permissible for 1 or 2 of his wives or more to go out and work? We'll find all of this out with this fascinating discussion here in just a few moments. The number to dial in Atlanta is 872 urges polygamy, and his name is Mike Brown. He's speaking to us live from Pleasant Hope, Missouri. And our next caller is going to be Todd in Loganville. And Todd, you're on WSB. Good evening.
Yeah, Mike, this is Todd, and I just wanted to first ask you, I just caught the program and wanted to see if you had been married to more than one woman before. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, how long did that last as far as with being married there?
Okay, the first one, I still have her. It's been 23 years.
Right, what happened to the second one that you had?
Okay, now the second one, we all moved out to Utah, okay, the whole shooting match, and that was the thing where I learned from my mistakes because she got a lot of pressure from her family. She moved back. And I think if I'd have just gone to her father and said, look, I'll give you $15,000 for this heifer, I don't think I would have had the problems I did.
All right. Well, I wanted to point something out. As far as in the Old Testament, it was very common for people to have more than one wife. But under the new agreement that we are with our Lord, and if you look in 1 Timothy in chapter 3, verse 2, it tells you not to have but one wife. And I think you need to get on your face before God and ask Him to forgive you. You have a good night.
Okay, what do you say, Mike?
Okay, well, the problem is he didn't quote that exactly, so I think he's somewhat inaccurate. And if anybody wants to really get into what the New Testament says about it, they need to read John Milton's 3-volume treatise called On Christian Doctrine. John Milton was England's most famous theologian. This guy was so good that in 1644, the English Parliament invited him to address them as to what the Bible actually taught regarding divorce, so that they could bring their statutes in conformity with the Bible itself. And what Milton did, he did about 60 pages on the subject, and he pointed out that what everybody has done, they were making exactly the same mistakes in the 17th century that individual just made. For example, you go to the part where it says a bishop or a deacon must be the husband of one wife. Well, it's pretty obvious if you read any type of a legal document. That's a restrictive clause. That means anybody else can have more than one, as long as you're not a bishop or a deacon. One of the other things that people keep misquoting, and they were doing this also in Milton's time, is that each wife must have her own husband, and each husband his own wife. And what Milton pointed out, he said, let's take that the way all these preachers are taking it. He said, let's extrapolate that back to the commandment, and let's say that you're not to envy your neighbor his house, his ox, his ass, his wife, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now, if we use that same yardstick, your neighbor is only allowed one ox, one ass, one wife, one house, and so forth. In other words, that particular argument was shot down in flames by John Milton in the 17th century, and it's not any more valid now.
We're going to get to the telephone calls here in a moment. So our West Virginia caller, our callers in Atlanta, we're going to get to you right after the top of the hour. You can stay with us past the top of the hour, right, Mike?
Sure.
We having little phone problems, but all of you on hold, we will get to you. Get to you right after the 11 o'clock news, so stay on hold. We've got a little weak telephone line on Mike, which we're going to have to rectify here in a few minutes. In the meantime, is a woman your equal, Mike?
No.
No?
No.
Is that because of the Bible, or is that just because of the way things are?
Well, that's both. In the first place, what the Bible does command is that a woman is to obey her husband in all things. Now, that absolutely doesn't happen in this society, and if you don't believe that, go tell your wife to go out there and bring in 2 fresh females for you. It's not going to happen. All right. In the second place, when you say not my equal, you have to be a little careful there, because every organism on the face of this planet is superior to every other organism in some fashion, or it would not have survived. For example, there are very few females that can do the type of things that I can do, or that other men can do. But on the other hand, in some areas, such as being able to judge character, intuition, administration, that sort of thing, they're far superior to the male.
What is the woman's place, Mike?
In the home.
And so if you have more than one wife, none of them is going to go to work.
Well, the problem that you've got is that we have an economic system that's the equivalent of a fort under siege. You just about, if you're going to have several women in the home, you're just about going to have them go out and work for a couple of years, or have cottage industries in order to support all the parasites that infest our society, such as the bankers.
Now, let me ask you this. What about purchasing a wife? Tell us about that.
Okay, well, let me give you a personal experience here. I always thought, I was raised in the 50s, and I was notably unsuccessful. First girl I ever went out with married a farmer from DeWitt, Arkansas. Didn't even send me a Dear John when I was in the Army. And I noticed everything seemed to be wrong. So when I started getting into these historical books in the Bible, and I said, wait a minute, everybody else was simply paying for the women they wanted, and they weren't going through all this negotiation nonsense. So here about a year ago, guy from New York, he gotten framed on a murder beef. He writes to me and says, okay, he says, I want my indictment overturned. I thought, well, all right, fine. And I figured the poor guy doesn't have any money, so I'll just write to him and say, okay, here's what I want. I want 3 sacrificial virgins. I want 1 as a down payment, and I want 2 more when you walk out the front gate. And the guy writes back and says, deal, and I'll throw in an 83 Cadillac. I said, okay, this sounds good to me. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure that anything would ever come out of this. I figured, I'm just being polite. The poor guy's doing 35 to life, and I don't really have time to spend a couple hundred hours on this. And the next thing I know, I'm starting to get letters from girls in this nursing school, And they're saying, okay, you know, I'm the lead, and, you know, I'm bringing my friends with me and so forth and so on. And so I asked this guy, I said, why would this girl do this? He said, well, and you know, we got to talking on the phone. He said, here's what happened. A few years ago, this girl had been jumped by 3 guys. They were trying to rape her. This guy jumped in the middle of it. He caught a bullet in the chest for it, and he took one guy down. The other 2 fled. And when he came to in the hospital bed, the girl and her parents were leaning over him, and the girl said, anything you ever want, it's yours.
And we're going to leave it at that point here for the news. And boy, talk about a cliffhanger. How our guy got women and an 83 Cadillac on a contract. Oh, yes. Probably never heard anybody like this before, huh? Well, his name is Mike Brown. He's a legal research specialist, and he says that polygamy ought to be okay and that women can be bought if that's what all parties think is okay. Don't forget to call. And our next caller is going to be Jennifer in Tallahassee, Florida. I understand you go to the same university as my son, FSU.
I sure do.
Go Noles.
Yeah, that's right.
Boy, I tell you, those Seminoles are sure hot this year.
Yeah, I hope it stays that way.
So, young lady, isn't our guest wonderful?
Oh, beautiful. I just love his philosophy. Yeah, I think it's interesting that he mentions it's demeaning for a man to, I guess, beg a woman to marry him. Has he ever thought how demeaning it is for a woman to be bought? Has he ever even considered that maybe that's demeaning as well? But no, he's probably just blinded from the glow of that 83 Cadillac.
Well, you brought up the point that it would be demeaning to be bought. And, of course, that is, I guess, that's like slavery, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm sure that term slavery has come up in your radio shows before, Mike.
Oh, certainly it has. But that's not what we're talking about, because if you go right back to Exodus 21, verse 7 and on down, what it says is if the guy buys her and he doesn't like her, he can't resell her. He's just got to turn her loose. And as far as being demeaning, I think that would, you know, it's like if you went up to a girl and said, hey, I'll give $800 for you, that would be demeaning. If he goes up and says $50,000, she should be flattered.
Oh, Lord.
But now, wait a minute now. Maybe, Mike, if the woman's willing, then that wouldn't be slavery.
Well, actually, in most societies, that's the way it was arranged. It's only in this society, in this century, that we have reduced what are supposed to be lifetime arrangements to rotating polygamy, to taking 19-year-old girls and putting them in a position where they have to make a decision who they're going to spend the next 40 years with, and at least half the time, maybe more, they make the wrong decision. That's why we have so many divorce lawyers.
So Mike, if you were to buy Jennifer and she's all by herself, you would give her the money?
No, it goes to her father.
Oh, so you would pay her father $50,000?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what kind of an attitude this girl has got.
But what would she get out of the deal? I mean, you wouldn't treat her poorly, would you?
Well, of course not. I mean, you're talking very valuable property here. You know, it's sort of like having a Ferrari. I mean, you don't just leave it parked out in the rain and go running into other cars with it.
So what would you do for Jennifer if indeed you bought her and she was your wife?
Do as far as what?
I mean, how would you take care of her?
Well, same way I'd take care of any of the others.
I mean, you'd buy them stuff and get them a car and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, certainly.
Would you say they would live a reasonably high lifestyle?
Well, let me divert this conversation just a little bit. Let me give a specific example here so everybody can relate to why this practice was outlawed.
Okay.
Okay. In 1882, Congress passed the Edmunds-Tucker Act, the anti-polygamy statutes, primarily to get at the Mormons. Now, I'm not a Mormon. I'm not defending or promoting what they were doing. However, doesn't it seem a little strange that at the same time Congress passed these laws, Nevada had legalized prostitution and nobody paid any attention? I don't think there's anything more degrading to a female than to be used as a public toilet for all the men who just don't want to take any responsibility for the pleasure they're getting. Now, I spent about 12 years in this. I kept trying to figure out, why did Congress do this? Why did they outlaw a practice that wasn't hurting anybody and at the same time just ignoring things like prostitution? And when I moved out to Utah and I watched these other people, and I thought, now wait a minute, there's something basically wrong here. Why did they do this? Well, finally it hit me, and here's what it is. Let's take a specific example.
And try to get up close on that phone, okay?
Okay, how's that?
Much better.
Okay. Let's say, I'm probably too old for Jennifer, all right? But let's say Jennifer is fairly talented. She's capable of earning a decent living, and she goes and gets a few other girls, and they all say, okay, here's the guy that we want. We think he'd make magnificent kids. He's hardworking. He's honorable. Let's say he's 25 years old. He's a mechanic. So they all move in with this guy. Now, the average person or the average couple in this society, let's say it's just remove it one step here, your average mechanic and your average nurse. All right, now the two of them buy this $100,000 home, and they're going to spend 30 years of their life paying it off. And in addition to the $100,000 they pay for the home, they're going to pay another $300,000 to the parasites running the banks in interest. Now, let's say these same people, let's say there's 8 of them. 3 of them are paying for the payments on the house. They're paying for the food. Mechanics keeping the cars running. They're living frugally. And the other 5 of them are generating $2,000 a week in discretionary income. In 52 weeks or 1 year, this group of people has paid off a $100,000 home.
That's assuming that the women work.
Oh, of course. In this society, you about have to, because it's the only way you're going to survive with all the parasites, such as the bankers and the Internal Revenue Service and all that.
But you said the woman's place is in the home.
That's correct, but let me finish here. All right? Let me explain why this was outlawed.
Okay, I'll tell you what, let's hold on to that.
Okay.
And Jennifer, don't go away, because I know you're going to have a comment about this. We're talking about women being a property and polygamous marriages. Our guest is Mike Brown, speaking to us from Pleasant Hope, Missouri. And the number to call is 872-0750, but those lines are gone right now. Outside of Atlanta, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-WSB-TALK.
We know you don't have time to mess around. That's why AM-750 WSB gives you the news you need first and fast. News you can use about Atlanta, your neighborhood, your money, health, family, and, well, just stuff that's important. No fluff. No wasting your time. Check in often, every day, and depend on it first and fast. From AM-750 WSB.
Good Friday evening to you. This is Wes Minner. Don't forget, I'm here on Saturday mornings as well. For those of you who can't be with us during the mid-afternoons, during the week, my guest tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock is a guy who just loves to take on you agnostics and atheists. Dr. Norm Geisler is in town over the weekend. He'll be on my show tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Monday, I'll be filling in for Kathy Fishman. My special guest Monday afternoon at 3, Bob Barr, former U.S. attorney, now the president of the Southeastern Legal Foundation, and who knows where he wants to be. He'll be with us Monday afternoon. Now, more of Sound Off with Paul Gonzales on AM-750 WSB.
Yeah, just don't let the state attorney catch you having a polygamous relationship. When you call Wes on Monday, don't tell him anything about what we were talking about tonight, okay? Our AM-750 WSB exclusive weather center forecast with our own meteorologist, Kirk Mellish. 30% chance of a shower tonight, low 56 to 62. Heavy rain possible tomorrow, high 70, low 53. Partial clearing Sunday afternoon, high 58, low 40. Currently 64 degrees on Peachtree Street. And our guest is Mike Brown, who is here to tell us that polygamy is a great idea. And we have Jennifer on the phone speaking to us from FSU in Tallahassee, Florida. So basically you're telling us how a polygamous family made up of 1 man and 6 women could pay off a $100,000 mortgage in just 2 years. And continue with your plan, Mike.
All right. Now, I realize this might sound a little far-fetched, but keep that in mind the next time you pass a Payless shoe store, because that was started by an outfit calling itself the Kingston Group in Bluffdale, Utah. It's basically the same principle, and the reason that it's socially unacceptable. Now, you can get somebody on here talk about prostitution, and nobody will lift an eyebrow, all right? But you talk about something that has been natural in almost every society except ours, and people go crazy because they've been programmed that way. And all I'm trying to point out is that what happens is, after a year or two, these 8 people, they not only have stiffed the bank for $250,000 in interest, a year or two later, if they want to be, they're not only not a customer of the banks, they are a competitor. Now, you can take the same principle with cottage industries. For example, if you have several women in a house, one of them's doing sewing, one does drapes, whatever, so forth and so on. You'll find this partially described in the last of the Proverbs. You have an economic unit that's almost unbeatable.
Now, to speed this up here, after they all work, the women work and they get the money, then the woman's place is in the home.
Well, that's only in a society like ours, in which you have all these parasites to feed. If it weren't for the fact of the debt money system we have, and the unbelievable taxes that we're crushed under, no, the women wouldn't ever have to work outside the home. It's just, this is sort of a self-defense thing, like the women passing the loaded muskets to the man on the ramparts fighting off the Indians.
Okay, let's see what Jennifer says.
Okay. Well, Mike, how do you feel about polygamy, where the woman has a number of husbands? Perhaps that would be ideal as well. I mean, maybe I could go out and buy a couple husbands and just set up a home, and they could work for me. And maybe I could get an 83 Cadillac, or maybe a newer one, perhaps 89.
Yeah, it would probably work just as well, wouldn't it?
Well, they've tried that in other societies, and it's never worked. What she's saying could possibly work if there were a shortage of women, but unfortunately, for a lot of the women out there, it's a buyer's market. There's more of them than there is of us.
Jennifer, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Yeah, and stay on hold there, because we give our out-of-state callers from time to time a WSB coffee cup, and since you're going to such a fine university, Florida State University in Tallahassee, we're gonna do that for you. Dale in Kennesaw, you're on WSB.
Hey, good evening.
Hey, Dale.
Thanks for having me on.
Good.
And thanks for having Mike Brown on. I don't think I've ever quite heard, exactly a man like him, and I don't necessarily have to agree with somebody to find them interesting.
Good.
But I just wanted to ask Mr. Brown a few questions, because as I've sat back tonight trying to figure out, how he thinks and why he believes what he believes, and
well, let's fire a question at him, Dale.
Mr. Brown, you keep quoting a lot of scriptures. Do you believe it is the Word of God, or do you just believe it's a smart book?
Oh, okay. Let's qualify that. I believe it's the Word of God in the original languages. I also believe that the English translators have mangled so much of it so badly that it's almost unrecognizable.
And the Greek text are the...
Oh, wait a minute, Dale. You got the answer to that one. Question 2.
Okay. Well, I just want him to... this is a personal question, he does not have to answer it, and I'll be gone. It's just something I'd like to know. Is what is his relationship to Jesus? And if, that would affect this... in a great way. I just want to know how he feels, or what his relationship is with Christ, because when he talks about the scriptures saying, wives, submit to your husbands, those same scriptures, in even the original text, say, husbands, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ has loved the church and gave himself for it.
Okay. I usually don't have callers. When I had John Nesbitt on earlier this week, there were no callers who came on and asked him how he felt about Jesus. But since we're talking about the Bible, I guess that's a fair question. Do you want to answer that, Mike?
Well, I can't really, because I don't understand the question. As far as a personal relationship, he hasn't come down and talked to me. I do try to follow the rules in the book he left us. But other than that, as far as having this personal relationship and this, that, and the other, I can't comment on that one way or the other.
And the next caller is going to be Susan in Marietta. Susan, you're on WSB.
Hi.
Hey, Susan.
How are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing fine.
I am absolutely appalled that, first of all, that he has the audacity to use Scripture to justify his complete lack of moral character.
Well, Susan, I have heard people use Scripture to justify everything from slavery to white supremacy.
It's all in how you interpret it, I guess, but he has a real strange way of interpreting it. I guess, in my opinion, anyway. But,
Well, I tell you what let's do, Susan. Instead of talking about the guest being immoral or whatever, let's talk rationally about what he's saying and what's wrong with it.
Well, first of all, it really bothers me that there are women in this world who would actually agree to something like this, to a ridiculous arrangement like that. I mean, if that is not the most absurd thing I've ever heard, there is absolutely no way that I would ever marry a man like that. If he was the last man on earth, I would not marry him. I am happily married. I have one child, and if my husband ever went out and even suggested marrying somebody else and bringing her home to be here also, I would be out the door so fast it'd make his head spin.
But you know, Susan, that they do this kind of thing in many parts of the world.
I think the women are absolutely, they must be lacking something psychologically. That's all I can say. They're definitely not normal, well-adjusted women. For one thing, jealousy is a normal human emotion. I took a psychology of marriage class in college, and one thing we studied was swinging marriages. And the teacher, who was quite liberal, really, in his thinking, said that there's absolutely no way that it works.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was going to ask that same question, Susan. The jealousy, obviously, is something that needs to be dealt with. And I'll tell you what, that's your question, Susan?
Absolutely.
That's your bottom line question?
How can these women get involved in a relationship like this and not feel jealousy?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I'll tell you what, we're running out of time for this segment, and we'll have our guest answer it after the 11:30 news. And that also is a question on my mind, because I was talking just about a week ago on this show about this pop singer over in Africa. He has 45 wives, and then he has 30 children. And 15 of his wives want a divorce because they're jealous of the rest of them. And he's in big-time trouble, and certainly there's a lot of jealousy going on there. But, Susan, that was an excellent question, and we'll feel that right after we break for the news. We still have no Atlanta lines left, but if you want to get us outside of Atlanta and outside of Georgia, our number is 1-800-WSB-TALK. Our guest is Mike Brown, and he says that women are just property. 64 degrees on Peachtree Street, and this is the enlightening voice of AM-750 WSB.
This is Kathy Henderson. You know me. I'm on the gardening show every Saturday morning, 6 to 9.
AM-750 WSB and sound off. To be a part of our show, call 872-0750. That's 872-0750. Now, here's Paul Gonzales.
And Mike Brown, who is a legal research specialist, and he also has a very unusual point of view. He believes that polygamy is the way to go in our society, and that basically women are just property. This is the way it always was in most of the world, and now things have been going down the toilet because of a change in the traditional family. And now I was mentioning, Mike, that there's a guy in Africa who has 45 wives, and 15 of them are going to divorce him, and he has treated them all really well. But what happened is 30 of his wives live in a mansion in Cameroon in a downtown section, and the other 15 live in a village. And what he did was he bought the city girls a minibus, and he didn't buy anything for the country girls. So they got very upset, and so all 15 are filing a group divorce against this guy. They're jealous, and not only jealous of property situations, but what about jealousy of affections? I mean, maybe one wife's going to be jealous of the other, aren't we? Don't we all have that basic jealousy in us?
Well, not really. Men get jealous. Women get insecure. because you'll find, for example, a lot of doctors' wives. They're so enamored of being a doctor's wife, they don't care how he carries on with the patients as long as, they're the doctor's wife. One of the fundamental misconceptions that women in this society have is that they think because they show their loyalty to a man by giving him their body, that's the same way he shows loyalty, and it's not. A man shows his loyalty to a woman by giving her his wallet. World of difference.
That is interesting. Our next caller is Robert in Atlanta, and Robert, you're on WSB.
Paul, you got a very good show tonight.
Thank you, sir.
And
I don't know if it'll win a Peabody or not, but it's fun.
Well, I think that if there were more people like Mr. Brown in positions of authority, we'd have a good society to live in. And
what is it that you like about Mr. Brown?
Well, basically, he's coming from something that's true with regards to. There was one caller that came that called in that made a comment about the Bible and Jesus, but in all Bibles that I've read, it states at the very beginning that it's someone's version, and when the word version is applied to the person who's writing it, I mean, then anybody can have a version, and I think that's the problem.
So you think that polygamy should be acceptable?
Yes, I think polygamy should be acceptable.
Well, now, the Muslims accept it.
I know.
Are you a Muslim?
No, I'm not. And there was another comment, since you mentioned Muslim, that Malcolm X made a very profound statement when he said that religion is the opium for the masses.
Yeah, he stole that from Karl Marx.
Well, whoever, it's a true fact, and it expresses itself clearly in today's society.
So, Robert, basically you think that our guest is right on the money?
Right on the money.
Do you get many of the callers on talk shows that agree with you so totally like that?
He's the second one.
The second one?
Right, and obviously that is a man of superior intelligence, and he should go to Isaiah chapter 4, verse 1. He's entitled to 7 wives.
7 wives.
Right.
Robert, thank you for your call.
All right.
Take care. And our next one is going to be, let's see, is it Mary's turn? Mary in Atlanta. Hello, Mary, you're on WSB.
Hello.
How are you, Mary?
Fine.
And what's your question, please?
Well, I didn't have a question. I just like to make a few statements.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. I can see why he has to pay for wives, because nobody in their right mind would have him to begin with.
Uh-huh.
And that's the biggest thing, and I can see why he feels like he does, because he doesn't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So he just answered all the questions for me, and I think everybody else out there that are Christians. And that's all I've got to say.
Well, would you like our guest to respond?
He can if he wants to.
All right, you just heard a perfect example of why the Apostle Paul forbids women to speak in assembly.
Ha 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 ha. Ain't that just too bad?
Touche.
All right, Mary, good night and God bless.
Thanks.
Okay. AM-750 WSB, Diana in Lithonia. You got Paul Gonzales and Mike Brown.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, Diana.
Well, listen, I go to Georgia State, and I just started this quarter, and, I've learned a lot about, like, our country and everything. And I think this man should go back to Africa if he wants to. I don't think he should try to change something.
Well, the only thing is our guest is not from Africa.
Well, I think he should probably go there, because there's no way he could get, I don't like his ideas, or, I like how he delivers a message to Robert from Atlanta telling him that he can have 7 wives. Then he says that the Bible is misquoted and that it's totally mangled. That's exactly what he said. Then why does he keep on going back to the Bible when he's contradicting himself several times? He brings up verses and then he says that the Bible is totally mangled. I mean, that makes no sense to me. I would like to hear a comment from you on that, Mike.
Okay, one thing I want to say here, I don't want us to be denigrating any countries. Africa, you mentioned, he should be sent to Africa as if that's some kind of prison. I can't let that go by. I know it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but Africa is a country rich in many cultures, and many of the parts of some of the African cultures are certainly far superior to ours. So let's don't pick on Africa.
Well, we're not picking on them, but we're just saying the views that...
No, you can pick on our guests, but I just don't want you to pick on Africa. So go ahead, Mike.
Okay, let's take this one at a time. In the first place, I said there are sections or portions of the Bible that have been mangled. I didn't say the whole thing was. For specific examples, if you go to anything in the Bible that refers to an electrical device, such as an ark, if you read it in context, they're referring to things as capacitors. If you read the Ark of the Covenant, you read how it was built. It was a tremendous Leyden jar. Well, obviously, since the translators from 1525 to 1611 were totally unfamiliar with basic concepts of electricity, they mangled that. Now, Exodus 20, Exodus 21, the laws on diet, and Leviticus 11, those are clear as crystal. And as far as her slam on Africa, hey, the fact is those people over there who think just the way I do to a large extent. My mother is an English teacher. She teaches English, or used to teach English to foreign students before she retired. She taught a lot of African students who came from polygamous households, and the fact is that their family stability in Africa is far greater than it is with the white folks here in the United States. The fact is, we have probably one of the worst examples, or we are one of the worst examples of a stable society with stable families that can be found not only anywhere on Earth, but anywhere within the last 20 centuries.
We're going to take a short break, and I thank you for your call, Diana. I want to remind all of you that a special benefit performance of the Pulitzer Prize-winning play Fences will be conducted at the Alliance Theater on February the 17th, and it's to help with the work of the Georgia Council on Child Abuse. It's a worthwhile cause and also a fantastic play. So if you want to get your tickets, call 658-1776. 658-1776. That's a reminder from the station that cares, AM-750 WSB.
Hi, this is Jim Rich inviting you to join me Sunday from 1 till 3 for Ask the Experts, AM-750 WSB's Health and Wellness Show. Springtime in Atlanta is just around the corner. That means the height of the allergy season. So Dr. David Tanner, an allergy specialist, joins us Sunday from 1 till 3 for Ask the Experts.
If you don't have time to sit in front of the TV or can't stop to read the paper, try the talk shows on WSB Radio. An easy way to be informed and involved. Listen to Atlanta Talk on AM-750 WSB.
Hey,